and consider these graphs. And I've done this during class a couple of times, but we're going to talk about the function and then the first derivative and the second derivative real quick again. When you're given a function, you're asked to create that first derivative or that second derivative, you need to find those critical points. Those critical points are where the slope is 0. There's 2 of those in this case, where at B and at D. So at B, the slope of that tangent line is 0, so that's why there's a dot over here. And at D, the slope of that tangent line is 0, that's why there's a dot here. As I start to look at these tangent lines to the curve, this is very, very positive, and then it gets less and less positive until it hits 0. So it's really positive, and then it gets less and less positive. Remember that this is the positive section of y prime. After that, when it hits B, it starts decreasing, and it decreases, all the way to D. That's why it's all in this negative portion of y prime. But remember, what the first part of this tangent line to the curve does is it might have a slope of, say, -1/2, and then it has a slope of -2, and then it goes back to having that slope of -1/2, and that's why that curve happens here. So there's that slope of -1/2, which maybe is about right here, and then it goes down deeper where it has a slope of -2. It's more negative, it has a greater, steeper negative slope, and then it goes back up. Then from D to E, you can see that it's all positive slopes. First, slight slope, and then it gets more and more steep. So that's why it gets higher and higher. Taking that first derivative and then changing it into the second derivative, you still want to look for critical numbers on the first derivative to create the second derivative. So the critical number occurs right here at C. So we know that there's a slope of the tangent line at C that is 0, so that's why this dot is here. We know on this side that it's increasing the entire time, so that's why it's a positive slope all the way through here. And then on this left-hand side from A to C, it's decreasing, and that's why it's in the negative section. So having had talked about a couple of these, what we're going to do is we're going to create the first derivative and the second derivative given this function, f of x. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the slopes of the tangent lines to the curve. I'm going to find those values at which the tangent lines of the curves are 0, which would be at B and D. I'd like to go back to this other picture really fast. This really should have had open dots here because of these endpoints. So I really should go back and correct that those should be open dots as well as these. Coming back to this graph, I do have endpoints that would also be critical numbers. We'll worry about those here in a little bit. As I look at this graph right here, the slope of the tangent line gets really steep negatively, and my line is not the best curve that was out there, but it does work. So it does get less and less steep as it gets closer to B. So down here is where the negative portion is, so it comes up and gets less and less negative. At this point, after B, it is positive slope, but maybe that's a positive 1/2. And as you look here, it keeps getting steeper and steeper and steeper. And then what happens is it gets less and less steep again. So these would connect up. And then lastly, we have a little bit of a negative slope, and then again it gets steeper. So we'll go ahead and put an endpoint here and an endpoint over here, meaning the derivative does not exist at those 2 endpoints. And there is my first derivative. Now the second derivative, we also want to look for the slopes of the tangent line to the curve, which would be at C. On this side we have positive slope, very steep, and then it gets less and less steep. So it's positive slope, and then it gets less and less steep. This is a parabola, so I know this is going to be a straight line. I'm going to use an open dot. As we talked about here, it's less steep negatively, and then it gets more and more steep, so it would be coming down like this. And I'm running out of space, but there would be an open dot down there.